Should you own gold? Well, I asked the internet. It was a polarizing experience, finding 8 reasons why you should invest in gold while simultaneously seeing 5 reasons why you shouldn't, and everything in between. Like any lost and confused soul, I turned to artificial intelligence. ChatGPT told me that as an AI language model, I don't have access to real-time data or financial information beyond my last update. Therefore, I cannot provide personalized financial advice, and it's essential to consult with a qualified financial advisor before making any investment decisions. I was shook. Not only was I left where I began in my 5-minute journey, artificial intelligence flipped the script. For I am a qualified financial advisor. I stewed on that for about 10 seconds, and then it dawned on me. AI, you didn't let me down after all. Flip the script, and I intend to, right here and now, with you. I'm not going to tell you if you should or should not own gold, but I am going to empower you with some information and let you decide. Gold returns the last 51 years. January 1971 to December 2022, 7.78%. The 2010s, 3.5%. The 2000s, 14.3%. The 1990s, a negative 3.3%. The 1980s, a negative 2.4%. The 1970s, 30.8%. Consider this. If you removed the 1970s, which was bananas, and bought gold in January of 1980, you would have bought it at $678 per ounce, not adjusted for inflation. By December of 2022, or 43 years later, the price per ounce was $1,824. Seems decent? That is a 2.3% return over 43 years. Adjusted for inflation, it's a negative 0.8% return. Now, you might be accusing me of cherry picking, showing the worst possible return for gold over 43 years. Maybe not. But to be fair, let's do the same with the S&P 500 index across the board. Stock market returns the last 51 years. January 1971 to December 2022 again, 10.6%. The 2010s, 13.6%. 2000s, a negative 0.9%. That's the lost decade. Diversifying small, mid-cap, and international stocks, please. 1990s, 18.2%. 1980s, 17.5%. 1970s, 5.9%. From January 1980 to December 2022, the same 43-year window, an 11.5% return. Adjusted for inflation, 8.1%. Now, to address the cherry-picking accusations, I went above and beyond, going all the way back to 1926 to find the worst 43-year window of time. It was from 1929 to 1971, which encompassed the Great Depression and 9 negative calendar years from 1929 to 1941. Said differently, 9 of the first 13 years in this 43-year window were negative. I'm not defending anything. I'm just pointing out some pertinent insights. The return over this period was 8.4%, 6.2% adjusted for inflation. Consider this, the lowest annual return over any 30-year period of time going back to 1926 was 7.8%. This would have been during a similar time period, starting in 1929, losing more than 80% of your investment during the Great Depression, and still making more than 850% in total over 30 years. Allow me to repeat this fascinating thing I just said. The worst 30-year return over the past 100 years or so was a total gain of 850%. Does gold protect against inflation? Here was average inflation in the decades we've looked at next to the stock market and gold returns. I'll let that marinate for a minute. You can pause the video if you need to. Let me repeat this one here if you missed it before we move on. From January of 1980 to December of 2022, or 43 years time, the return of gold adjusted for inflation was a negative 0.8%. Here is one last piece of information because I couldn't help myself. I went and looked at every year the stock market was negative. So all the worst years, I repeat, these are all the worst years in the stock market when the hope is gold does the opposite. I went all the way back to 1970. There were 11 calendar years. Here they are, and here was the return of gold in each of those years. In the 1970s, gold was immaculate. In the 1980s and 1990s, it wasn't. The beginning of the 2000s, it was fine. The latter part of the 2000s, gold was finding its former 1970s glory. In 2018, it was sixes. In 2022, it held its ground. My takeaway, if you care, the value of gold simply moves with the perceptions and emotions of humans, which are unpredictable. Other publicly traded markets do as well. I recognize this. But unlike gold, most companies and real estate properties are adapting, changing, and improving with human ingenuity and work ethic. These improving investments tend to aid in more predictable long-term growth because they're becoming better over time, which makes them more valuable. I often think of it this way. Gold's value is impacted from supply and demand alone. Gold won't be different 43 years from now. Only the supply of it and demand for it will. A company's value tends to be more unpredictable in the short term for those same reasons, human emotion and expectation, but less so in the long term due to human ingenuity and improvement. The data we just reviewed seems to bear this out. A company will look really different 43 years from now. Some excelling, some being average, some flaming out. That's a diversified plug. Don't just buy one company. Gold and other precious metals are tangible and colorful and solid and nice to look at and hold. But they also might not grow over long periods of time. They may or may not hedge against inflation. They can still lose value during recessions. And if the dollar collapses, the banking system crashes, and or the world ends, I'd consider hauling around food versus gold bars. I'd consider a livable shelter versus a bunker full of precious metals. I'd appreciate being part of an organized community of individuals I can trust, support, and lean on versus going out into the wastelands to try and barter with zombies. I know what you're thinking. Dallin obviously doesn't think we should buy gold, or at the very least own very much of it. I would never say something so definitive out of fear of compliance. All I'm saying, simply consider the information presented here the next time you hear a Birch Gold ad, because they can be very persuasive. Until next time.